Just 60 seconds before the courtroom door slammed shut amidst hundreds of skeptical eyes and whispers full of rage, she felt the heart-wrenching pain of betrayal and the icy chill of a ruthless conspiracy. But could a horrific secret buried in the past tear apart all the accusations and drag a corrupt system to its ultimate downfall? Elena Harper stood in the middle of the courtroom, her heart pounding as she counted down the final 60 seconds before the door slammed shut, trapping her in a trial that had already been rigged from the start. The heavy atmosphere hung over the spacious room, where neatly arranged rows of wooden seats were filled with eager faces awaiting the outcome. Some came out of curiosity, others to witness the downfall of a woman daring to challenge power, and some, the shadowy figures lurking in the dark, were there to ensure that she would never walk out of that room without being destroyed. The whispers buzzed like hundreds of needles pricking at her nerves, their words laced with disdain and doubt. But Elena remained poised. She stood tall, her hand clenched tightly at her side, feeling the pulse pounding beneath her skin, a reminder that she was still here, still fighting. The chandelier above gleamed down, casting its light onto the polished wooden surface of the defense table where she would sit, a battlefield from now on. A clock on the wall ticked away each second, each tick a countdown to the collapse of her life or an unexpected reversal no one could foresee. Elena's eyes swept over the rows of seats opposite her, where the jury sat, their faces as cold as stone statues. Those eyes would decide her fate. What caught her attention most was the gaze of Mark Caldwell, the officer seated not far away, a smug grin curling his lips. He had won many trials before, burying countless truths under piles of tampered documents, and now he was certain he would do it again. But Elena was no easy prey. She was not a side character in someone else's story. She took a deep breath, the cold air of the courtroom seeping into every cell, sharpening her senses more than ever before. Just behind her, Rachel Nanningen, young, sharp, and determined, was organizing the papers in her bag, her eyes revealing a flicker of concern but also a faint glimmer of hope. The two of them had spent the entire night analyzing every detail of this case, but all of it could be rendered meaningless with just one wrong word. 60 seconds left. The sound of footsteps echoed as the judge entered, the black robes billowing like a specter of judgment. Police officers were scattered around the room, those who would not hesitate to intervene if she dared cross any lines. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again with newfound resolve. One day, people would tell this story not as a simple trial, but as a battle for justice, and she would be the one to write the next chapter. Elena Harper stood firm in the courtroom, her legs stiff but her heart pounding with an intensity she had never felt before. She could clearly feel the heavy tension in the air, as if a dark veil was covering the space, suffocating every breath. The second hand on the clock on the wall continued to move, each tick echoing like a drumbeat, signaling that something terrible was about to unfold. And then it came. The courtroom door swung open suddenly, and the heavy sound of footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, shattering the silence. Sergeant Victor Grayson stepped in, his police uniform immaculate, every crease sharp, and his shiny badge reflecting the lights like a constant reminder of the power he held. But what Elena saw most clearly was the triumphant smile on his face, a smile that showed no restraint, like a man savoring the fall of his enemy. Harper. He drawled her name, stretching it as if he were savoring a fine meal. His smile filled with arrogance. Finally, you can't escape. Elena didn't look away. She felt the ridicule in his eyes, his satisfaction in thinking he had finally won. But just as he moved closer, a sharp tug from behind caused her wrist to be tightly bound by cold metal cuffs. The sound of the lock clicking echoed like a sentence that had already been delivered before the trial even began. The whispers in the courtroom flared up like flames meeting the wind. Some gasped, others lowered their heads to whisper, while reporters immediately raised their cameras to capture the moment, a picture of a federal prosecutor cuffed in the courtroom. This was a perfect image for the headlines, an unforgettable shot for the papers. But Elena didn't falter. She didn't panic. She stood tall, her eyes never leaving Grayson, refusing to show him any sign of weakness. He wanted her to feel humiliated. He wanted to see fear in her eyes. But all he saw was a calmness that was almost terrifying. Elena understood this was not the end. This was merely a show designed for one purpose, to silence her. But she wouldn't let it happen. They can imprison my body, Elena whispered, her voice cold but firm, loud enough for Grayson to hear. "But they can't imprison the truth." Grayson's smile faltered for a moment, as if he hadn't expected her to react like that. But quickly, he regained his usual confidence, shrugging mockingly as if he still had the upper hand. "We'll see how many ideals you hold on to once you're behind bars," he said, then turned to the officer standing beside him. "Take her away immediately." Behind her, Rachel Nanningen stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is a clear abuse of power. My client hasn't been convicted." But before she could finish, the judge's gavel came down hard, silencing her words. "Order." His cold voice left no room for further objections. Elena didn't turn back. She knew Rachel wouldn't give up, but she also understood that at this moment, no amount of argument could stop what had already been set in motion. Everything had been arranged in advance, like a game that had already been decided the moment she stepped into this courtroom. She felt the eyes of the people in the room following her every step as she was escorted past the rows of spectators. Some whispered, exchanging looks of skepticism. Others looked at her with pity. But Elena paid them no mind, not caring about their whispers or their pitying stares. She knew they didn't understand. They didn't know that she would not break, because she knew this was just the beginning. And when this performance ended, those who thought they were winning would face something they had never anticipated. Secrets buried long ago would be uncovered, and they would be the ones forced to pay the price for the crimes they had committed. She would not let them win. The heavy footsteps of the officers echoed on the cold stone floor, blending with the endless murmurs from behind as Elena Harper was led out of the courtroom. The cold handcuffs bit into her wrists, but she barely felt them anymore. Her mind had drifted elsewhere, to another time, another place. A filthy alley with the pungent smell of dampness hanging in the air, where light rarely seeped through the cracks in the old buildings. She remembered the days of her childhood when her tiny feet stepped on the trash-laden ground, trying to avoid the stagnant puddles left by the relentless rain. The slum where she grew up had nothing but shattered dreams and promises never kept. Her father left when she was too young to remember his face, and her mother, the strongest woman she'd ever known, worked every job she could find, from cleaning restaurants to sewing clothes, just to put food on the table every night. But no matter how poor they were, her mother taught her one thing: no one can take away your dignity unless you let them. Elena vividly recalled the day she first understood how brutal injustice could be. She was just a 10-year-old girl standing outside the old grocery store, tightly clutching a few coins her mother had given her to buy bread. A white police officer walked in, scanned the store, and then stopped at a black boy picking out a candy bar nearby. Without a word of warning, the officer grabbed the boy and accused him of stealing. The boy cried and denied it, but no one in the store spoke up. Elena stood there paralyzed, feeling anger boil within her, but unable to do anything. That night, she asked her mother, "Why did he do that?" The boy didn't do anything wrong. Her mother silently stroked her hair and said, "Because they think they have the power, and because not enough people stand up against them." That moment etched a vow deep into Elena's mind, a vow she would never erase. She would never be silent. She would never turn her back on justice. From those years spent in the cramped, run-down apartment, she threw herself into her studies, reading every law book she could borrow from the public library, dreaming of a day she could change this broken system. She worked tirelessly to get into college, pulling all-nighters in the library, fighting for every opportunity, no matter how small. And she did it. She escaped the dark alley, stepping into the law school classroom with an unwavering resolve. She became a federal prosecutor, someone who could speak for those who had been trampled on, just like the boy from years ago. But now, after everything, here she stood, handcuffed, charged, turned into a criminal in the eyes of the people she had once fought for. The irony couldn't be more apparent. Elena blinked, pulling herself back to the present as her footsteps met the cold tile outside the courtroom. Before her was a long hallway, at the end of which was the steel door leading to the police car. Grayson's face reflected on the glass door, his smug smile unchanged. But he didn't know something. Hope had carried her from that dark alley to law school. It had kept her steady through every hardship. And even now, as her enemy chained her, it still burned quietly within her. They could imprison her, but they would never extinguish that flame. The darkness consumed the small, cramped cell, with only a faint light from the hallway filtering through the cold metal bars. The suffocating atmosphere carried the scent of mold, blending with the chill that seeped into her skin, making the cell feel more like a living tomb. Elena Harper sat curled up on the cold metal bed, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, as if that was the only way to hold on to any warmth. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs, but the pain had faded. The only thing she felt now was the emptiness surrounding her, like an endless abyss waiting to swallow her whole. Footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, but no one stopped in front of her cell. The ones who had locked her away were likely celebrating their victory, believing they had silenced a stubborn woman. But Elena wouldn't allow herself to fall. She closed her eyes, letting her mind drift back to the past, to a case she had never forgotten. She thought of Daniel Mercer, a middle-aged man, his face weathered but his eyes still holding a spark of goodness. He was innocent, a victim caught in the whirlpool of a corrupt system he could never defeat. Daniel had been falsely accused by a group of officers who had fabricated evidence, a script written to remove him from a sensitive investigation. Elena could still remember the moment in the courtroom, watching Daniel shake his head in despair as the verdict was read. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered, but his voice was drowned out by the judge's gavel. Elena had fought with everything she had to overturn the case, but she had arrived too late. Daniel Mercer couldn't withstand the prison's torment. One day, he was found in his cell, hanging by a torn belt. That was the first day in her career when she felt completely powerless, and it was on that day that she swore she would never let this happen again. She opened her eyes, and the surroundings were still the same, for narrow, cold walls. But inside her, something had shifted. Those who wanted to destroy her thought they had trapped her, but they didn't know they had inadvertently locked her into a space where her will was stronger than ever. Elena straightened her back, her cold, sharp eyes scanning the metal bars as if she were seeing through the walls of injustice. She whispered a promise to herself. "If I make it through this, I'll never let this happen again." The darkness could cover her, but it could never extinguish the light of hope. And in the long night, that light only needed a spark to ignite into a fire that would burn everything trying to conceal the truth. Inside the cold prison cell, Elena Harper sat motionless, her wide eyes staring up at the dust-covered ceiling. The chill from the stone floor seeped into her skin, but she felt nothing except the weight of the memories flooding back. Daniel Mercer, his unjust death, still cut deep in her mind, a constant reminder of how cruel the system she once trusted could be. She had vowed never to let anyone else suffer the fate he had, that justice could not be distorted by those in power. And now, as she stood accused herself, she understood more than ever that this battle was not just for her. It was for everyone who had ever been crushed under the wheels of injustice. A sound echoed in the hallway, cutting through her thoughts. The iron door swung open, and a guard gestured for her to stand. "They're waiting for you in the courtroom," he said, his voice flat. Elena stood, adjusting her crumpled shirt, then walked out of the cell without a word. As she walked down the narrow hallway, each step resonated in the confined space, and she could feel the watchful eyes of those around her. She knew what awaited her in that room: accusations, lies, and most importantly, a trial that would not just judge her, but would serve as a test of whether justice still existed. The courtroom door opened, revealing the tense atmosphere that gripped everyone present. The jury sat rigidly in their seats, their faces cautious, yet Elena saw no sign of compassion in their eyes. They had heard too many accusations, swayed by the forces that wanted her out of the game. Up front, Victor Grayson stood tall, his posture exuding arrogance, as if he were controlling the entire room with his words. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice deep and clear, each word delivered like a prepared indictment. "We are here today to prosecute a woman who has betrayed the law, someone we once trusted to uphold justice, but who instead chose the path of deceit, manipulation, and destruction of the trust within our system." He turned to look at Elena, his eyes gleaming with amusement, as if he were savoring every moment. Elena Harper not only falsified evidence in a federal investigation, she abused her position to interfere with justice, intentionally altering proof to protect criminals. His words echoed through the room, sparking a wave of murmurs among the audience. Some nodded, others whispered to each other, their eyes scrutinizing her. But Elena didn't blink, didn't lower her head. She sat there silently, listening to the lies, the accusations being thrown at her as if they were undeniable truths. She knew that what was unfolding before her wasn't a fair trial, but a perfectly staged drama meant to tarnish her reputation. The prosecutor continued his argument, portraying her as a traitor to the very ethics she had sworn to protect. He presented fabricated documents, carefully edited emails to accuse her, each detail meticulously arranged to create an undeniable narrative. But as the jury became more absorbed in his performance, Elena felt something else. Every lie Grayson told, every distorted story he wove, only strengthened her resolve. On the contrary, they were like bricks laid down on a path leading her to the truth. He thought he could bury her with his lies, but he didn't know that the truth had a way of rising up. Elena leaned slightly back in her chair, her eyes fixed on Grayson's face, as if she were watching for the first crack in his facade. This battle had only just begun, and she would not let it end the way Grayson hoped. The courtroom felt like an arena where every gaze was fixed on Elena Harper, waiting for her response to the brutal accusations Victor Grayson had just thrown at her. He stood there poised, as if he held the fate of others in his hands, his sharp gaze sweeping over the jury with absolute confidence. A few members of the jury nodded slightly, as if they had been convinced by his dramatic performance. But as everyone expected Elena to crumble, she sat there completely still. No anger, no fear, no reaction in the way anyone might have anticipated. She simply observed. A strange calmness enveloped her, as if she were no longer sitting in the defendant's chair but standing outside, watching everything unfold with the eyes of someone who already knew the outcome. Every word Grayson spoke, every argument he made, contained a flaw. He was too confident. He believed that with his power and control, she wouldn't be able to escape this trap. But that very arrogance was revealing his weakness. Elena tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving him. He truly believed she would break, that she would react as someone cornered, or worse, lash out and mess everything up. But he was wrong. This game wasn't over, and she still had a card to play. She focused on the way he spoke, the moments where he hesitated for just a fraction of a second before continuing his fabricated story. The edited emails, the carefully arranged testimonies, everything was perfect, too perfect. But she knew that in everything that was too perfect, there was always an unacceptable flaw. It wasn't real. Elena caught a glimpse of Rachel Nanningen from across the room, her lawyer gripping her pen tightly, her face tense, but her eyes holding a faint spark of hope when she saw Elena remain unshaken. They had worked through the night to uncover the flaws in this case, and now, right in the middle of the trial, she could see it all becoming clear like never before. They thought they had lost, but they had forgotten one important thing. She never entered a battle without finding a way to win. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the stillness in her mind, as if the storm surrounding her could no longer touch her. Hope was growing stronger, slipping through the walls Grayson had tried to build around her. It was no longer a small flame, but had become a powerful wind, ready to blow away the fog of lies. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Grayson's, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. He didn't know that he had just made a mistake, but she knew, and she wouldn't let it pass without exploiting it, because right now, the scales of justice had just begun to tip in her favor. The courtroom doors suddenly swung open, drawing the attention of every single person present. The hushed murmurs in the gallery instantly grew into a low buzz of curiosity as a woman with a confident stride entered the room. Her jet-black hair was pulled tightly back into a sleek ponytail, and her sharp, calculating eyes hid behind a pair of thin, sleek glasses. Sophia Tran didn't need to speak a word for the entire room to fall into stunned silence. In her hands, she held a thick stack of meticulously organized documents, the papers fastened together with an unshakable precision, as if they contained the very key to shattering the illusion that had been so carefully constructed. Elena straightened in her seat, her heart racing as her eyes locked onto her old ally. The room seemed to slow as Sophia approached. She had always been one of the best lawyers Elena had known, someone who never entered a courtroom without first securing the perfect weapon. Sophia didn't flinch under the weight of the world around them. Instead, she walked directly to the defense table where Elena was seated and placed the stack of documents in front of her with a steady, deliberate motion. "We can win." Sophia's voice was low but filled with absolute certainty. "I found the trail of the truth." The words were like a bolt of electricity that shot through Elena's chest, igniting a spark she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. It wasn't just an empty attempt at reassurance, it was a promise. Elena's gaze locked onto the papers before her, and as she skimmed over the sharp, precise typewritten words, a rush of adrenaline flooded her body. These weren't just any documents. These were the pieces she had been missing, the proof that had eluded them for so long, now finally laid bare before her eyes. The links they had desperately searched for, The cracks in the story they had been dying to expose were now right there, staring her in the face. In the prosecutor's corner, Victor Grayson's confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. His piercing gaze narrowed, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face, barely noticeable but unmistakable. He had meticulously orchestrated everything, covering his tracks so well, eliminating every shred of evidence he thought could tie him to the truth. And yet, here was Sophia, unwavering, unshaken, and with a pile of evidence that could unravel everything he had worked so hard to bury. He hadn't accounted for one thing. Sophia Tran never walked into a courtroom unless she was certain of victory. Elena looked up at Sophia, their eyes locking for a brief moment, and for the first time in hours, Elena felt the weight of hopelessness lift from her chest. There, in that simple, silent exchange, she understood that the truth hadn't been extinguished. It had simply been waiting for the right moment, the right person to expose it. Elena felt the slow, steady burn of hope rekindle inside her. No longer just a faint flicker, but a raging fire, ready to sweep through the courtroom and obliterate the lies that had been so carefully constructed. Grayson's smug arrogance returned, but it was now laced with a thin veil of tension. He had underestimated them, thinking his lies were too perfectly crafted to be challenged. But what he didn't know was that perfection often had a flaw, a small crack, a vulnerability just waiting to be found. Elena's fist clenched, her knuckles turning white as the fire of determination blazed within her. She didn't need to say a word. The battle was far from over, and now, with Sophia's unwavering presence and the documents in front of her, Elena was ready to fight back with everything she had. The tide had turned, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Elena believed, truly believed, that justice had a chance. The battle was no longer one-sided. Grayson had underestimated them, and now he would pay the price. Elena was no longer alone, and together with Sophia, they would take this fight to the very end. Sophia Tran stood up, her sharp eyes cutting through Victor Grayson like she was seeing straight through the flawless mask he had so carefully crafted. She moved towards the witness stand where Victor sat, exuding confidence. But Elena didn't miss the brief moment when he subtly shifted in his chair, a small sign that he wasn't as comfortable as he appeared. Sophia knew this. She had spent her entire career reading liars. "Sergeant Grayson," Sophia began, her tone calm, but each word sliced through the air like a razor. "You testified that on the 14th of last month, the defendant, Elena Harper, accessed the police department's data system without authorization, correct?" Victor immediately nodded without hesitation. "Exactly," he said, his voice firm.